Hello everyone, I guess hopefully you're having a wonderful day, and today we are here with a video on why I am personally a little skeptical of first year sets in soccer. Primarily the two you see up on screen, 2017 Chrome, 2014 Prism, but this same sort of sentiment can be extrapolated out to different sets that people might be pushing since they are first year of blank. And we'll talk through why. Before we get into it, just understand that if you collect these sets, believe me, I'm not hating on you as a collector. I'm not saying what you're collecting is dumb. I'm simply saying that I don't know if it's right for me, and I'll explain sort of why that is. I've had comments where people think that because I'm not as high on these sets as other people, that I'm having a dissenting opinion or throwing shade at these people or think less of them as collectors. That's not the case at all. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm just stating what is my truth, and my truth is I'm not as convinced and not willing to pay the crazy premiums, at least that I feel like is crazy on some of these cards, that other people are. And I'm going to explain as to why that is. If you agree, great. If you disagree, also great. I think that it's good that we have, opinions on both sides, and I think it's good that I share an opinion that goes against sort of the norm in soccer, because you don't want to have people all sort of agreeing on the same thing, because usually that's not going to last forever, right? So if I can be an opposing voice right now, then perfectly fine if that fits what my truth is, and so let's go ahead and talk through it. So if we look at other sets in terms of the biggest sets that come to mind when you talk about another sport, starting with basketball, I'm going to have three iconic sets that come to mind for me. Go ahead and pause and take some guesses yourself if you want to be involved, but first is, without a doubt, the 86 Fleer set, considering Michael Jordan rookie, along with tons of other rookies, and there wasn't really much going on in basketball at the time, so that was a pretty notable one. We also have 61 Fleer for more of the vintage OG GOATs in basketball, a great set as well. And then I put in PMGs. This was me given a little bit here. I think PMGs are more sort of the new age pump item that people are excited about. I think they're great. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I think if you ask a lot of basketball people, at least people that collected for a long time, what the best cards are, this probably doesn't come up, but for me it's just so synonymous with basketball at this point that it comes to mind for me. Moving on over to baseball, the first one that came to mind for me was the T206 set from 1910. Of course, has the Honus Wagner along with a great Ty Cobb and many other greats from the pre-war age in baseball. Next was the 1933 Gaudi. That's just one that comes to mind to me, as it has a lot of amazing photos within it, great colors, of course great players as well, and from what I understand it was the first set to really incorporate chewing gum into it and start that whole sort of trend, so that's also notable. And then finally the 1952 Top set. These seem to be, at least for me, the three most prominent baseball sets. I'm sure if I was more into the weeds, there might be some, later Topps issues that sort of come to mind, but I think from an outside perspective, these are probably the three that most people would think of. Of course, if that's not the case, that's okay, but I'm just using these as general examples, right? So when we look at these two, the first thing I notice is that the baseball scene is a little off-center, so that's not great, but I mean, really, the thing that comes to mind here is there's only one set that, at least to me, speaks as being notable because it is a first-year set, and that's probably the 1952 Topps. But honestly, if it didn't have Mickey Mantle, I don't really think that the outside of the baseball sphere would really be all that knowledgeable on it. So a lot of these sets have things going for it beyond just being a first-year set, right? I'm an outsider on these sports, so I don't know them thoroughly. I would think 1961 Fleer is also a first set. The thing is, with these first sets in vintage, usually it's a big deal because there weren't many sets before it, and so with a first set, you get just a ton of great players in one go, while in the modern age, that's not the case. I mean, there's people creating cards every single year, so many manufacturers, so many different sets, that if you create a first set, you're not necessarily getting a crazy unique crop of collectible cards. And back in the day, as you can see, I mean, these sets aren't typically just known for being a first set. They have so many fundamentals beyond that. So I threw together some common traits of these sets and sort of what I noticed. The first one is that you have iconic early cards for players. That's almost a given across the board. With all of those sets, there are players that come to mind within those sets where you're probably getting a rookie for the most part. Beyond that, you have synonymous brands, Topps, Gaudi, T206 set. I mean, just it goes hand in hand with when you think of baseball cards. The same thing with Fleer and basketball. PMGs maybe a little less so, but again, sort of the new age numbered collector, that is synonymous, I would say. They're also all pre-2000. Now, of course, this is a little bit different than soccer because soccer collecting didn't really take place, at least to a great global deal, before 2000. So that really, doesn't relate as much, but it was something that I found to be true amongst all of those card sets. And beyond that, we also have strength over time, which, sort of goes to the pre-2000, but they're not really things that popped up overnight, right? These are things that have been collectible for a long time to varying degrees, but have grown into their foothold that they have now. So if we take a look at soccer and think of it through the lens of someone that has come into collecting soccer in the last 4 or 5 years, what are the most prominent sets to them? I think that, for the most part, this is an answer you'll get quite a lot, and that would be 2017 Topps Chrome, 2014 Prism, and 1970 Panini World Cup set. Now, maybe you have different answers. If you do, I'd love to hear them down below. But I think generally speaking, these are probably the 3 that come to mind. Given that, we'll go ahead now and sort of compare with the other sports in terms of how many of the commonalities they share from these sets to the other sports we talked about prior. So the first one is iconic early cards. That is the first in terms of iconic early cards, really the only one that comes to mind for me in terms of a great rookie would be Kylian Mbappe. And even that, Mbappe still has a lot to prove. Of course, a World Cup win, great World Cup score, but beyond that, nothing that crazy in terms of accomplishments and trophies in that regard. Being locked in League One for as long as he has doesn't really help him much, right? The other sets don't really have much going on here. 2014 Prism, not really. 1970 has a lot of great players, but not really any notable rookies, at least that I'm aware of. Beyond that, synonymous brands. For this one, I only put 1 out of 3 of the soccer sets did, and for me that would clearly be Panini World Cup stickers, considering those have been around for 50 years. That's how most people experience the soccer collecting hobby. And Panini Prism, yeah, it's great, yeah, we love it, first Prism this, but at the same time, it's only been around for 3 World Cups, and it seems like Panini's sort of, barely holding on to the licensing, so we'll see how long that lasts, right? So it may only be around for a decade or two in the whole span of soccer collecting, which really isn't all that much. Same goes for Topps Chrome. Now, Topps Chrome probably going to be around longer, but there's so many different Topps-based releases that you don't necessarily just think Chrome, right? There's so many different other ones that you could go for. Chrome is a part of that, but it's not the thing that you think of without a shadow of a doubt, right? Next is all pre-2000. Again, soccer's a little bit more tricky in this regard, but in terms of pre-2000, the only one that matches up with that is 1970 World Cup stickers, and again, strength over time, the only thing that would match with that is 1970 World Cup stickers up until the last 4 or 5 years. 2017 Topps Chrome and 2014 Prism were relatively unappreciated in terms of the soccer collecting sphere. So when we look at this, the common traits that we saw in the other sports barely map to soccer. The only one that does really in a good way would be the 1970 World Cup set. It misses out on the iconic early card, but it has the other 3. 2017 Chrome has the iconic early card, and 2014 Prism doesn't really have any of this. Now you could say maybe synonymous brand because it is Panini, but Panini Prism is a little bit of a different thing. So again, we don't really map up well with the other sports, at least so far. So now that we have the importance of first, right? This is the issue I sort of take with these sets, and that is that what makes these important? Typically, the first thing you hear is it's the first year of Topps Chrome or it's the first year of Prism. And while being the first of something is great, simply being the first shouldn't be the main thing that you throw out there as to why something is a collectible set, right? Now, it makes sense. It's a nice add-on, don't get me wrong, but to say it's the reason we're all collecting it, that's kind of a bit nuts in my opinion. If simply being the first set of something was important enough to go collect it, then we could collect almost every set throughout the history of soccer, at least the first year of it, right? Beyond that, we wouldn't care, we just collect the first year and that's it. Which then leads me to how important are these two sets, right? Panini and Topps have been around forever in soccer, so what makes these the go-to products suddenly? Like, I struggle with that a lot. Panini's been around in soccer since the 60s. Topps has been, pretty prominently involved in Merlin in the 90s, but I even think all the way back to AMBC, I'm pretty sure that's a Topps-related product, and somehow we've come to the conclusion that the only cards that matter, the cards that matter the most from these brands, are the cards that were made 5 to 10 years ago, rather than any other point in time. And to me, that just doesn't make a lot of sense as to why being the first product made 50 years into your existence in soccer suddenly makes you the best set in soccer, right? I understand why we sort of got there, because a lot of modern people like modern sets, and it's just a little bit easier of a transition, right? But I struggle with it pretty greatly. In this one, people may sort of battle this, but how many people collect the base set? I think it's important. To truly be a collectible set, you need people from top to bottom willing to collect it. Say, for instance, 2014 Prism. I do think people actually collect that in base. I know people do, right? And me personally, I do. I have a World Cup base set sitting around here in a binder. I bought that as a full set way back in the day before Prism was huge. I just sort of thought it was a fun set and wanted to go ahead and grab the whole thing. But it's easy to collect that because it's one World Cup. It comes around every 4 years. Sure, it's a lot of cards, but at the same time, I mean, they're all basically throw-ins. You can get most all of them for free in a lot somehow if you just buy it in a big enough quantity. And so at least putting together a base set of a World Cup is manageable, right? Now on the other end of the spectrum, who's putting together a 2017 or just any Topps Chrome base set? Let's just put it that way. Who puts together a Topps Chrome base set of any year, right? Because, I mean, and maybe there are people out there, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone out there doing it. And the issue there being, you would have to put together a Chrome base set every single year, and most of the time you're kind of getting random players from random leagues, and there's not really a whole, hell of a draw to it, right? And so I wonder then, if people aren't collecting the base set and everyone's just, rushing towards the numbered cards because everyone loves numbered cards, it feels a bit inorganic, right? I mean, if people aren't collecting the lowest of the low in terms of that set, I don't really trust that it's the best set ever out there. And that's sort of the pedestal that these get put on. Part of what I'm talking about in that regard is my fear of consensus, or the fear of having influencers. Like an example here is Shyway Vlogs. I never really felt comfortable with him in the space. As time played out, I was probably rightfully so not comfortable, but nonetheless, he came into soccer and started buying up the Topps Chrome 2017 set. He has this 1/1, or at least he had it. I don't know if he still has it. He had a 1/1 Cristiano Ronaldo along with an out of 10 red, and then he had like a 1/1 Messi too. I mean, he had a lot of 2017 Chrome grails. He says over here on the right that inaugural 2017 Topps Chrome is already an iconic set, not just for its hobby relevance and importance, but its aesthetics too. Love the full bleed, super refractor finish, and the new red pickup defines what red is. Now, the first thing, I understand that Topps Chrome's heavily loved in soccer for the moment, and the first year set especially, but it might be a little premature just a couple years into, or a few years into soccer collecting really being a thing to call something iconic, right? That has to play out over time, and we throw those words around very loosely right now. Beyond that, I mean, he said that it's important because of its hobby relevance, which just basically means people talk about it a lot right now, and also that the full bleed of color. Yeah, so it looks good and people talk about it a lot right now. Does that make it an iconic set just because people talk about it a lot right now and it looks good? I mean, that's going to happen throughout the rest of soccer collecting time. People are going to talk about some set right now and it's probably going to look good, right? Does that make it iconic? I don't know. Maybe we get there over time, but I do think people need to be patient in that regard and give these things time to actually, sort of make their mark, right? And to actually go through cycles, because we haven't seen cycles of Topps Chrome. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's basically just been one big ride to the moon in terms of popularity. We've never really seen that come back, or at least we haven't fully seen that come back. Now, if we go on a little bit further, part of what I fear with this type of stuff is that you get these types of quotes going around at card shows. Now, I don't think this has ever come out of Jeff Wilson's mouth, but he's a good figurehead for the type of person I'm talking about, where they say, yeah, I love first year Topps Chrome Soccer. Really hard to go wrong buying that set, right? That's a really good set. And I feel comfortable buying this, that, and the other card of it because it's a great set, right? And so when you get people saying those types of things, what I've noticed, at least with soccer, because we're so new, that over time, if people are saying that, like go back and watch card show videos 2 or 3 years ago. 1, 2, 3, at any point in time, go back and watch old videos. The types of cards that they say, oh, you can't go wrong buying this, or oh, this is really, people love this, I'm gonna buy it too. Usually that ends up not being a good purchase, right? And I know we went through a boom and a bust and all that in between, but just generally speaking, the types of cards they talk about in regard to this sort of statement typically are sort of towards the highest they've been in regard to public belief in said product, right? If people are saying this type of stuff, usually it's hard to go any higher than that in terms of public sentiment. The real fear would be the downside that comes with that, right? Which is maybe people start to think, oh yeah, maybe you can go wrong with first year Topps Chrome Soccer. Maybe you can go wrong buying that set, and then they're a little bit more hesitant, right? That's not really been a thing that I've seen anyone say in the soccer sphere. And so to talk about a priced-in effect, typically, I feel safe in this sort of a category where the people around me in the sphere of card buying that I'm in are there because they like the cards. They're just a nice collector that enjoys the cards just like myself, and we're having a grand old time. Now, of course, just because you're a collector doesn't mean you can't hope that cards go up in price. It doesn't mean that you can't hope that people enjoy the set the same way you do, but where I start to get a little hesitant is when you have the likes of, say, of Jeff Wilson coming in, and he likes to buy the next big thing, right? And it doesn't have to be Jeff Wilson, but it has to be the Jeff Wilson type of people. And I see this all over in soccer. I think a lot of people are just desperate to be able to buy something that they think will have relevance, and they just want to get a foothold on what they think is going to be the next big thing. And so if they hear Topps Chrome's the next big thing, they typically follow. And so you see the Jeff Wilson types on Instagram, any social media you like to go down, you see them around. And if you've been here long enough, you can sort of spot them, right? Now, finally, we also have the Steve Aoki types that just like coming in and buying the peak. And I see these people as well that really just kind of come in and start collecting a set because it's the hype thing, because it sort of, makes some waves and gets your name out there. And while that's great, it's typically not the best of time to be full board if Steve Aoki or the Steve Aoki types have just came in and bought, right? So in terms of price in effect, if it's just a collector out here collecting, that's great, right? That's great. But once you start getting these other figures in here that don't actually enjoy it and they're spending good money, well, then you wonder, well, is it all priced in, right? People always hate when I talk about the pre-boom pricing on Topps Chrome and Prism and all this. I wonder why they hate it. Because they say, oh, soccer's so different now, you can't compare it. No, you can. You totally can. I go back and do it all the time. Now, you can't say just because a card was worth X pre-boom, it should be worth X now. But within the sphere of soccer, you can understand what's the typical range, right? So for me, what I've noticed through going through sales comps for a long, long time is that basically in soccer, some cards are 1 to 3x what they were pre-boom. Some cards, if they gain a good narrative, are up 5 to 15x, right? Like pretty high amounts of multiples. But then, maybe the occasional one's up 20, 30x. This orange Topps Chrome Messi that we're looking at right now sold for $82 in 2019. Just, a full year before COVID came out, a couple years after the product was out in a BGS 10. Now, we have the same exact slab that has sold twice since then, right? And so the next sale that came out was $12,000 in 2022, and now the most recent sale was $6,900 in 2023. So just looking at the multiples there, we went from 80 up to 12,000, which is just an insane multiple, 130x, something along those lines, and now it's down 50%, but it's still up almost 90 times what it was worth in 2019. Just think about that, 90x what it was worth in 2019. Now, I understand it's gained a narrative, it's got a lot more collectors, great, I get that, but at the same time, this is such a massive shift in terms of how people view this set. And I think that's an important thing to note, was back in the day, sure, people were willing to buy it, but in 2019, I don't think anyone in soccer had the idea that Topps Chrome 2017 was the best set ever. And now in soccer, in 2022 and in 2023 and in 2024, there's such a high percentage that think that. And I'm personally not in that group. And I grow closer to thinking that that's just a crazy take and a crazier take every day I'm a part of this, because soccer has so much collecting history, so much history. And to just say that this set that came up in 2017 is the set is so hard for me to believe. I understand it's a great looking set. I understand it's got collectors, but man, I think it might be priced in that it's a good set. You know, that's sort of my take, is that, yeah, I think people are pricing it as if it might be the best set in soccer, and I'm not sure if I believe that, right? And I'll add on that I think the first year in Topps Chrome is almost already accounted for within the Topps Chrome brand itself. So we'll talk about now the difference between 2017 and 2018 in terms of pricing. So to start, we have the 2017 Topps Chrome Blue Messi out of 150 and a BGS 9. This was one of the more recent comps. There's actually some other comps that were a bit higher, but were earlier in time, so I went with a later one, even though it's not PSA necessarily, because the one we'll compare to is. And that is a PSA 9 of 2018 out of 150 Blue Messi right here that goes for $75. And obviously the discrepancy is massive. Basically 750, actually closer to probably 900 if you wanted it in a PSA 9, compared to 75. So that's, you know, a 12x-ish from going from one year to the next, all because it's first year brand and second year brand. Now, I understand that Mbappe rookie's in here, but Mbappe has a lot of rookies, let's be honest. So, you know, just because it's Mbappe rookie doesn't, I don't think, necessarily mean that the set itself is wholly collectible, right? But still, the premium is absolutely accounted for, at least in my eyes. When I compare to this type of stuff, what I use is UFC, just because that's another sport that I moderately collect from time to time. And I also see the similarities that they have with Topps Chrome, where Topps Chrome came around in a paper format early on, and then eventually in, say, the 2017, 18, 19 range, got Topps Chrome branding, and you see the parallels, right? And what I notice is that there's really not a massive discrepancy between first-year Topps Chrome UFC and other years of Topps Chrome UFC. Sure, it might get a little premium, but for the most part, if you can't get one year, you probably just go to the next year, because why is it really that different, right? It's not that big of a deal, at least it shouldn't be. Meanwhile, in soccer, we have an absolutely insane relative premium than another sport like UFC. Now, of course, UFC, less pronounced. Maybe they don't care as much about Chrome. I get that. The narrative probably isn't there. The sort of statistics would prove that, but I think we are on the full other end of the spectrum where this narrative is very much accounted for, and maybe even more so than it should. Same thing to a little bit of a lesser degree. I mean, the numbers look a little bit more heinous, but this is a PSA 10. What I will say is I couldn't even find a graded card or a graded comp of this 2018 Modric, and if you see here, I mean, the price discrepancy is massive. I mean, basically $25 to $425. Now, of course, this is graded 10, it's a gem, but how much of it, I mean, sure, maybe this card on the left's $150, $200 compared to $25 almost. I mean, that's, again, a huge discrepancy, and you see this across the board for this set. That's just sort of the norm. And for me, as an outsider that doesn't really collect it, I mean, I would just be so much more inclined to go collect second year, or even maybe third year. The further you get back, the more parallels there is, which sort of makes it difficult. But for me, it seems like a quite significant multiplier from first year to second year. And as an outsider looking in, it doesn't really appeal to me. And so this takes me into prospecting, which might sound strange, but, you know, stick with me here. People look at prospecting soccer like, I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen on Instagram or various social medias that people absolutely destroy prospectors and say, you guys are idiots. Why would you buy Ansu Fati? Why would you buy Mason Mount? I mean, even Erling Haaland, he's so overpriced. Why would you buy these guys? And then when they fail, they sit back and they laugh and they say, you deserve it, you know? And so I think most people in soccer can agree prospecting is terrible, right? Prospecting is stupid. And you know, maybe financially, if you're not picking the winners, yeah, it's going to look pretty bad. If you pick some winners, it looks good, right? So on and so forth. But what if I told you that soccer sets are pure prospecting on where soccer's going to go? I mean, okay, so if you didn't know, these are crawling kids back here just to spoil the show. But basically, soccer, in terms of its collectability, is in its infancy in terms of a global sort of collective culture, right? Now, soccer goes back a long way, but it's all very regional, and only recently has it all sort of culminated into this worldwide collecting culture that we're slowly growing. But people are talking about all of these random sets, and I threw in the gold kabooms because people hate them, and I just wanted, you know, another picture. But basically, people talk about these sets as if they are the next big thing, when in reality, this is still very much prospecting in terms of what will be cared about in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? It's very easy to see why these sets matter at this point in time, or a couple years ago. Because why? Well, it was 2022, 2023, and most of these sets were only 5 to 10 years old. Sort of like a prospect in soccer. They're young, they have so much life ahead of them. People might think they're the best set ever. But in reality, in 20, 30, 40 years, how likely is it that someone's going to go say, actually, 2010 was the best era for collecting, and these were the best sets, right? That's so difficult to predict, yet we have so many people in soccer going around acting like it's almost a surefire thing. And for me, that's where a lot of the fear resides, and a big reason why I just step away from it. I think that in soccer, and I know this, but basically there is so much out there to collect that if everyone's talking about something, my best advice would just be go somewhere else. You can find something else you want to collect in soccer, and if you can't, you probably don't even like soccer, to be honest. I don't think that that's a harsh take. I mean, there's just so many eras, so many players, so many sets. There's just so much out there. And most people, not most people, but a lot of people that I see basically put themselves into this own little hole and pretend like only sets created the last 5 years are what matters, and maybe more in particular these sets right here. And that's just not a belief system that I can subscribe to. Going along with the pricing that we talked about with the orange, but just a different way of looking at it is that, yeah, it was $66 for PSA 10 gold back in the day, right? 2019 right here up at the top. We get to an all-time high of 14.4 thousand, which again, almost over 200x actually. That's insane. Nonetheless, since then we've actually come down almost 33%, somewhere around there. A nice little third off the all-time high. And what I want to talk about here is that you're starting to sort of see a cycle in terms of it roared up and now it's coming down. And where does this coming down actually end? Just one thing here for this comp, the $6,000 comp right here that's sort of half highlighted, that's a PSA 6, but it's jersey numbers, so that's not actually a PSA 10. Keep that in mind. Nonetheless, point being that we did see the roar, and now we're sort of seeing the fall. And so for me, I'm way less interested, like most people probably are, of buying something that has just started to fall and has come down a little bit, because especially on something like this, I don't know where that floor is. We haven't tested the floor, right? Now, I like buying things that are dropping a lot, but in soccer, I've noticed, at least on a lot of the other things, items have come down 80, 90%. On a lot of stuff, right? Now, maybe the all-time highs were crazy, but this is only down 30%. So that's not really a percent where I feel comfortable, right? And what I wanted to note here is this all-time high price basically took place at the ultimate bottom, or what seems like the bottom of the soccer card hobby. I think if you ask most people, the 2022 Golden World Cup auction was probably the lowest pricing we've seen on a lot of cards since. And so all that to say that these might be on their own cycle, but on a different time, right? Just because that they were such expensive cards at the bottom of a market doesn't mean that they're going to stay that way necessarily. And as you've seen, despite the soccer market sort of kicking back up a little bit, we've seen this actually go down another 30, 40%. And this speaks back to something I've been saying, that is, there's always going to be things going up and down. Not everything goes along with the total market, right? Within that market, there's always things doing their own thing. In 2020, it was ultra-modern cards. In 2021, it was pre-modern. In 2022, it was vintage. And then at the end of 2022 and going into 2023, it was really low-numbered cards, really scarce cards. And now those things, even the rare scarce cards, are starting to fall back. And where does that end? Who knows? But all that to say, you're not just safe here because it's a collectible set, and you actually could even be caught buying the peak of this while the market was at a bottom, and you could have ended up committing to a purchase that at the time you thought was great, but ends up being an all-time high price for a card at the bottom of the market, right? That's a terrible pairing. At the bottom of a market, you have the most opportunity to buy so many things that can go up, but instead, we're buying the one set that everyone's talking about, and then that set proceeds to go down. Not really a great look, right? And I'm just tired, to be honest. But if I'm being totally honest, I think that this is the set I trust. And I say this as someone, people are going to say, oh, you just like vintage. Guess what? I own 0 of this set. I don't own a single sticker in this set, but I think it is the best in terms of my opinion and in terms of what I think would be the best barometer going forward, right? So Panini World Cup stickers are as iconic as it gets. There's 50 plus years of building the reputation of this collectible, and that's basically how everyone gets into the soccer hobby outside of America, where we just like cards and colored cards. The players in these sets are known commodity, so you're not sort of risking the set's reputation on is Mbappe going to be the GOAT, right? It's just sort of set in stone what it is. There's also different backs, which make it fun to collect and to hunt. There's still some risk given fake stickers. That's one to highlight, and that's probably why I haven't really bought many of these. That stickers in general are a little bit in turmoil in the sense that these companies have to figure out how to tell if they're authentic or not, and so they have to go through some growing pains in that regard, which is why I'm a little iffy on sticker sets, but especially sticker sets that haven't had known fakes come through yet, because that's where their guard is probably let down a bit. There's also a lack of priced in effect. I mean, when you go to sold listings for the Topps Chrome cards that we were talking about earlier, you'll see so many for thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, depending on the card. Meanwhile, in this 1970s set, I mean, yeah, there's some big Pele sales every now and then, but other than that, basically no one cares. And I think it's the best barometer for soccer. Basically, if you told me that I had to guess how well the soccer hobby is doing in 20, 30, 40 years, but I could only have one set that told me that, only one set where if I got the data, I could make an informed decision, I think it would be this set, right? Because I think if this set isn't doing well, I don't think soccer's probably doing well. And sure, that's a grand generalization, right? There's no way to perfectly know. But I think at the same time, if you told me 2014 Prisms at this point in pricing in 2040, I don't know if that carries, because maybe Prism was ended in 2026 and there hasn't been a Prism set in 15 years and people are just kind of over it. Or maybe Topps Chrome isn't the thing anymore and people like Sapphire, people like on-card autos, or people like different parallels that we don't even know about yet. I could believe that. Meanwhile, sure, stickers might not be a fan favorite here in America, but I think generally speaking that this would give me the best sort of barometer in terms of how healthy the soccer market is going forward. Meanwhile, I don't know if the other two really give you that great of a gauge, and a lot of people would tell you that for soccer to do well, Topps Chrome first year has to do well, or Panini Prism first year has to do well. I think they're saying that because they own those cards and because they want that to be the case, and because for them, if those sets aren't going up, they're not doing well, which means soccer is not enjoyable for them. But I'm not viewing this from the perspective of owning these sets like I just talked about. I barely own any of these. I probably own more 2014 Prism, the most 2014 Prism. I own a few Topps Chrome 2017, and I own none of these. And I just said that this is the winner in my mind, or at least this is what the barometer is. I have the opposite of bias in this regard, that I don't own any of this set. Meanwhile, I understand where it all sort of stands, at least in my mind. And I know people might not see it the same way, but hopefully you can take this opinion and at least compare it against your own, and hopefully you get something out of this. But yeah, that's my opinion on first year sets and why I'm a little hesitant. Hopefully you enjoyed. I know it's probably a controversial video and you might have already made your comment, but if you have anything you want to share, I'd love to hear it down in a comment below. If you enjoyed the video, do make sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more videos like this as soon as I go live, make sure to subscribe. But with that said, hopefully you have a wonderful day, and peace.